are the universe, so beautiful. Through all of the hurt we'll stand, invincible, so beautiful. We'll take on the world. We'll take on the world.
What's up, hysterical people? I'm Pamela Torrance, the creator of the Hysterical Society, and this is my podcast. Where to begin? 1 year ago, the Supreme Court of the United States just decided to take away reproductive rights from women and people with uteruses all over the country, or at least the protections, and basically threw it back to the states, of which we know so many states are not on board with protecting women and protecting bodily autonomy for everybody, anybody. These men want to control. The patriarchy is not going to stop at Roe v. Wade. They're already now talking about a 15-week national ban in the Republican-led Congress. I mean, I'm even more mad now. What's up, Alito? You're off gallivanting on somebody's yacht and private planes, and you're vehemently so mad that Roe v. Wade has, what, not allowed you to, force everybody to have children against their will? So yeah, I'm even more pissed. I'm even more mad now. It's been a year, and I couldn't even imagine the kinds of restrictions and the legislation that's being brought in all of these crazy red states. I've been tracking it in the Hysterical Society blog since January, and it's pretty bleak. I'm lucky. I live in California, but I mean, over a year ago, I just saw this coming, and I just knew that it was going to be bleak times for women and people with uteruses in the United States. So it's hard to imagine. It's 2023. Why do I care so much about this? I was intending to tell my story in the pro-choice documentary film that I did last summer called We're Not Going Back, which unfortunately is a terrible title because here we are. My story is kind of mundane, but I will describe it now just to make sure that, I'm on the up and up and equal footing with everybody that already contributed to my film and anybody else who feels compelled to share any specific anecdotes or stories in the podcast. So basically it was pretty mundane, which is why I didn't make the cut for the film. But I was young, and because I'm in California, I was just lucky. It was pretty easy. I was 16 and I was stupid. I got knocked up by, my second boyfriend who was older, and I kind of just went along with his pull-out method, which obviously didn't work after about 3 months. And, so I went and got an abortion. It was pretty easy, except the only complication that I had was I was so sure that it was exactly what I needed to do that I didn't wait at all. And I made an appointment and I went down there. I was actually too early. The embryo hadn't even implanted into my uterine wall, and they weren't able to find it with the ultrasound. This was long before medical abortion was an option. So, they couldn't do it. And they sent me home. They told me that the possibility of an ectopic pregnancy was sort of the reason why they can't just go in there and try it anyway. And that would obviously have required a more major medical procedure that they don't do at the abortion clinic in town. So yeah, they sent me home. And I think the most scary thing was my boyfriend at the time was the only person who knew about it other than me. And we didn't have cell phones or even pagers back then, I don't think. And so he was supposed to come back after 3 hours. And of course, I was done after about an hour. And I was just sort of scared, feeling a little bit abandoned while waiting there in the waiting room for him. And quite scared about the possibility of an ectopic pregnancy, mainly because I hadn't told my parents that, obviously having a more complicated situation would have required me to get parental consent for surgery, etc. So, but we went back a couple weeks later, and I was able to get the procedure done, really with no fanfare. I never ended up getting married or having children, which is fine, and it just is what it is, and I'm a very happy, independent woman. Made a career, and now I'm trying to be a filmmaker and podcaster, apparently, blogger. I just got so fired up about this issue specifically because, it affected me back in 1980, whatever, and the idea that this isn't an option for so many people now just breaks my heart, because it just really shouldn't be that way. I mean, I've been fired up about a lot of things, gun control, climate change, Black Lives Matter, science deniers, and crazy conspiracy theorists, because I actually do have a background in science. But, this was the thing that really had completely changed the trajectory of my life. So had I not been able to get the abortion at the time, even if I would have given the baby up for adoption, which I guess I would have, gosh, not hard to think about. I was in high school. I was at the beginning in the fall. I would have probably had to leave high school to, have a growing belly. So it's just insane. I mean, I never, ever regretted it. I never looked back. That was not in the cards for me at that stage of my life in high school. In a way, I was a victim because the first time with that boyfriend, was basically date rape. I now realize, looking back. And then, just to make it not so dirty and gross, I dated him. I continued to be in that relationship and to sort of make it legit. Like, oh, we had this thing in God, it was disgusting, in his Jeep. That was the first time. And then just to make it not quite so disgusting, I just dated him. I dated him. So yeah, that was dumb. I was a dumb 16-year-old. And, how many dumb 16-year-olds are out there? Or even younger? They can't be just popping babies out. I'm sorry. And obviously the real rape victims or incest, do you want to have a child that looks like your rapist or your rapist uncle or whatever? No. So anyway, as part of these inaugural episodes of the podcast, I think I'll be referring back to this film. So I wanted to give a little bit of the backstory and kind of explain a little bit more about why I made this film. So thank you very much for listening. On June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court of the United States overturned Roe v. Wade, which had protected women's reproductive rights as the law of the land since 1973. This decision came after a flurry of new state laws from conservative states tested Roe by drastically restricting abortion access. These state laws were led by SB 8 in Texas, which took effect in September 2021 and had two main components: restrict abortion window to within 6 weeks of conception, and encourage civilians to sue aiders and abettors. Soon, Oklahoma and several other states followed suit with their own copycat heartbeat laws. Just to give you a little bit of the backstory about the film, I've been an aspiring filmmaker, screenwriter for many years, and I'd been kind of planning my exit strategy from my corporate sales job where I sold clinical trials for a living. Very exciting. I think really it was when Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed that I just started to get a little bit worried, and all of the horribleness of the former guy and that whole administration was finally coming to fruition with the Supreme Court, knowing that there was going to be this case out of Mississippi. And there were other cases that were lining up if the Mississippi one didn't go up. Yeah, we kind of saw it coming. Those of us who are like political junkies, like I am. And so it was around December that I think I made the decision that I was going to make what would have been a short film at that time. And I launched my recruitment video in March of last year. You know, I was still in a little bit of a denial about the actual Roe v. Wade overturning. But I wanted to make sure that the topic was covered, and and somebody would shine a light on the topic. I guess at that point I thought, because of course I had my abortion in the 80s, and Roe v. Wade was put in place in 73, and I realized that there were, the women who had to suffer before Roe v. Wade, many of them are still alive, and I thought, gosh, if we could get them to share some of their, back alley, coat hanger, horrible, harrowing stories, that would help educate the younger generation who maybe didn't even really have to worry about it or didn't even think about it. And now they have to worry about it, of course. That was kind of my initial inspiration, was to make sure we can capture maybe some of the women who never ever talked about it, would be willing to share their stories. And then when the SCOTUS leak happened in early May, it became much more real. And that's when some of the Facebook groups that I belong to that are progressive and kind of women, there was like a one that was women against the former guy and stuff like that. Those groups, most all of these women were so mad that they just, started sharing their own stories written in those groups within the protections of the private group, but with, lots of camaraderie and commiseration by the fellow group members. And honestly, I realized at that point that, the more harrowing stories it felt were coming from the more oppressed states, the red states. So, just me here in Los Angeles filming my friends who had harrowing stories anyway. But that was the moment that I said, I have to get out of California. I have to go to the states where people are already being affected by the restrictive laws. And I tried to map out a whole plan and get all my appointments set up before I left the house here in Los Angeles, but that didn't really work out. Best laid plans, right? I had like a committee I was going to try to get on board, but I couldn't even get them to agree upon a time to meet, much less actually coordinate a plan to help with the film. So I basically just did it on my own. I just got in my car and I went off. I only had one appointment set up. That was with Kathy. And here's a little snippet from Kathy's testimonial.
He had taken me across the state lines to a place in Kansas where they perform late-term abortions. And I'll just say that he was a butcher. I remember my father basically shoving me into the back door of this doctor's office. They don't call it a backdoor abortion for nothing. And I want to tell you that yes, I was young. I was pregnant by my first love. And I wanted that child. I wanted that child.
She's the one that convinced me that I had to get out of California. And so I did reach out to her, and then I had a 2-hour phone conversation to make sure she felt comfortable. And then I set out on the road June 16th last year. All of the other subjects in the film, I was able to recruit just kind of organically. There were a lot of referrals. So the first interview that I had with Kathy, she referred me to Tulsa and one of her friends there, which was Julie. And here's a little tease of Julie.
When you say the word pro-choice, those are 2 little words, but there's so much more. Our family, our society, nobody talked to young women in 1969 about getting pregnant. I was 17, so I turned out to be pregnant in a small town in Texas where it was not legal to get an abortion.
And Julie took me to All Souls Unitarian Church, where I met Shannon, and Shannon hooked me up with somebody who eventually led me to the Rage folks out of Oklahoma City, which is one of the reasons why I went back to Oklahoma later. So it all just kind of came organically. And it was while I was in Tulsa that I learned about Dallas. At All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa, they had already had Daniel, who's the pastor from First Unitarian Church of Dallas, who's in the film. They had him speak, so they told me I had to go to Dallas. So that's exactly what I did. And it turned out, interestingly enough, that I had basically come from Tulsa to Dallas literally the night before the Dobbs decision landed. So I had just arrived in Dallas, and I honestly was thinking they would at least give me the weekend to kind of regroup. You know, I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't think the actual legislation, I thought they would push it to the very end of the term in the very end of June. But they kind of surprised us on June 24th, which was a Friday. Here's my little scramble post that I did that day. They did it. They fucking did it. They took our rights away. They're trying to make us be characters in The Handmaid's Tale. And we're not going back. I'm so pissed right now. I'm in Dallas. I've been traveling the country in the Bible Belt. I was in Oklahoma just yesterday. I am so mad. I can't believe they did it. They stripped our rights. Women and trans men and any persons who care about this topic. We have to fight back. We're not going back. Now it's up to us. We gotta row your vote. I have a great set of footage and clips from already my time in Oklahoma mainly that I will be finishing editing today and dropping, and please share it. I hope it goes viral. We're not going back. They have to hear us now, loud and clear. And we have to take to the streets, and we have to take to the voting booth. Thank you for supporting the film. This is it. We have to fight back, and we have to get people out to vote. Everybody you know needs to vote in November. Thank you. And then it went from there. You know, I had a lot more recruitment potential after the decision landed. I went to rallies. The first rally was the next day in Fort Worth. And then I also went to the rally a few days later in Dallas. Was able to recruit from the rallies, you know, told people what I was working on. And I was able to capture some of the other subjects in the film. You know, I think Ashley and Austin I had met that morning, and then I filmed them that evening. And here's a little peek at Ashley and Austin's testimonial.
Ashley and I met a few years ago. I saw how she was with her daughter.
One of our biggest things that we had talked about before we really decided on, yes, we do want another baby, is he was worried about us going through an ectopic pregnancy. You know, you don't think about it in the moment whenever you're going into that doctor's office and you're hoping that you're going to see a baby. You know, you're hoping that you're going to be pregnant if you're trying.
I remember thinking how fortuitous and serendipitous it all felt as I just was able to capture a variety of kind of different harrowing stories. But I will say I struggled. It wasn't all hunky-dory. And I think the biggest thing that frustrated me a little bit throughout the summer is that knowing that the Black and brown populations are the ones that are most deeply affected by these abortion bans and restrictive, you know, requirements, etc., that they were the people that I needed to make sure their voice was captured and incorporated into this film. And, you know, for those of you listening on the podcast, you can't see, but I'm white. I'm a Caucasian woman. So I get it. There was a bit of a distrust and a lack of willingness to engage and participate when I was trying to recruit folks in the BIPOC community. So I have enough, I think, in the film to make sure that I tell that side of the story. But it was something that I did struggle with. And I learned, as my own white privilege, you know, I learned a lot through that summer of why. I guess that's where, you know, now with this next iteration in this podcast, I would like to dig in a little bit further on some of those issues and hopefully, you know, build bridges so that we can work together in 2023 and beyond to make sure that we take care of all oppressed populations. So not only cis white women, of which I am, but also, you know, LGBT folks who need reproductive care, but also have other challenges with getting health care for transgender and, you know, in general bodily autonomy and just like accepting their existence. Me and white women, especially in this kind of new feminist movement, if you will, and bring along the BIPOC populations, minority folks who I know were just completely ostracized and not really included, didn't have a seat at the table during the early, suffragette movement, etc., here in the United States. That's not good. That's not cool. And if anything, they are the folks that, need to have access to reproductive health care. So these are all reasons why I have made this podcast. And I have already lined up some amazing guests that I'll be interviewing in the future episodes. But for these first couple episodes, just wanted to set the stage and tell you a little bit about me. Because I'm a nobody. I'm not a famous person, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a healthcare reproductive rights expert. I do have a science background, but I'm just a person who had an abortion. It was so easy and the right thing for me at that time that the idea that that isn't available just breaks my heart. So I had to do something about it. So here we are. So Reverend Deneen Robinson, pastor, Unitarian Universalist Church of Oak Cliff, was one of my favorite people that I got to meet on the road. She agreed to meet with me, but unfortunately, she tested positive for COVID that morning that we had our appointment. So I did have to do the interview with her over Zoom. Here's a little glimpse into what Deneen had to say.
I am Reverend Deneen Robinson, pastor of Unitarian Universalist Church of Oak Cliff. I also am the Director of Religious Policy and Strategy for the National Birth Equity Collaborative. When I think about Roe, think about it first knowing that my daughters will begin their consideration of their reproductive choices from a place that I didn't even have to think about.
We Zoomed for about an hour and only a little bit of it made it into the film. I'll probably release more of that interview as its own standalone podcast episode in the near future. So definitely look for that because she's so amazing and she's been fighting for reproductive rights for people in Texas for so many years. And she's just fun and a great soul and somebody who tells it like it is. So it was so much fun to meet her. And even though I didn't get to meet her in person, I did get to meet her a few times a little bit later on in the summer. So I definitely loved Deneen, and she was one of the stars of my film as both a, authority figure, a professional authority figure who does abortion activism work, but also, she tells her own story as well. So I definitely love Deneen. So Andrea Gallegos, she was also phenomenal. She ran the Tulsa Women's Clinic. And when I met her, it was literally probably 3 days before the Dobbs decision. Here's a little peek into what Andrea shared.
We have currently stopped providing abortions at Tulsa Women's Clinic since the governor signed the total ban into effect. May 19th was when that happened, 2022. If we were to provide an abortion outside of the very few exceptions that the total ban allows, then we as the clinic, me as an individual, any staff member, our physicians, any funding organization, any person who assisted the patient into getting to the appointment, covering the cost of the appointment, could be sued for up to $10,000. These laws basically deputize private citizens into being able to be bounty hunters, essentially.
I was a little bit shocked that they had already stopped providing abortions there at Tulsa Women's Clinic, even though Roe v. Wade had not been overturned yet. And that was because they were afraid of the vigilante part of the new law that had been restricting since May, the month before. She's also affiliated with the clinic in San Antonio that she briefly mentions violated the SB 8 law, that the Texas law had been in place since September of 2021. So both Oklahoma and Texas were suffering even before Roe v. Wade was overturned with these crazy restrictive laws that, were being challenged, but in theory, obviously were already in place officially from the legislation. Red states. I needed to be home in time for a wedding, which was on July 3rd. So it was getting a little bit late, and it was a few days before that, but I realized I probably should start heading home to California. So I just happened to check out a different Facebook group, and I happened upon somebody's post, similarly a written post about their story that was very harrowing. It had to do with rape, etc. And that was somebody that I just reached out to who was in New Mexico. So I was in Texas, going to be driving back to Southern California, and I said, hey, New Mexico's on the way. So I ended up hitting up this woman. Here's a little bit from her story.
After a while, my mom and I realized I was pregnant. Luckily, 5 years before, Roe versus Wade had been passed. So she was able to take me to Planned Parenthood. And they treated me so well. I remember it just being like a regular doctor. It hurt a little bit, and it was over. And I haven't really talked about it until now, and I'm 57 years old. I would never have told this story, I don't think. And I'm mad that I have to.
I, planned to spend the night in Albuquerque one night. I actually found another woman in a different Facebook group who was in not too far away, and I was able to capture both of them in the same day. And that other woman gave an equally interesting and diverse testimony for the film. Here's a little tease from that testimonial.
Born in March of 1971, and I'm adopted, which means that my biological mother did not have a choice. She had to carry a baby before Roe versus Wade. We talked for about an hour, and, shortly into the conversation, she tells me about my conception. It's pretty awful to hear that you're a product of gang rape.
So, it was just kind of a miracle that almost my best recruits came from just a very organic way. I think because of at the time, everyone was so mad that they wanted to participate. I even actually had people who I had met along the way before the decision dropped, and then afterwards they got so mad that they had rethought and they had missed their opportunity to be in the film. And then they reached out to me by email and said, okay, I want to do it now. But of course, by then I was already not in their state anymore. They were in Oklahoma. So it was kind of crazy. And honestly, I probably could have just stayed out on the road if I didn't have that wedding and gotten so many more stories. But I obviously had a deadline. I set out in June knowing that I was going to have the film locked and loaded, and I was targeting a specific film festival that I had been in the year before with another film. And that film festival was the Awareness Film Festival, so I kind of had a feeling that they would accept us. The Awareness Film Festival runs in mid-October, so it was perfect timing to get the premiere done before the election. And then they also had an online platform, so the film was shown for a few weeks online through their partner platform. So I did promote it heavily, of course, between then and the election. I don't get to take all the credit for, out of the 5 states that had reproductive rights on the ballot in some fashion, all 5 went for reproductive rights, either voting no or yes, depending on the way the proposition was worded. Plus Kansas, I think right after Roe v. Wade, I think within a month, they had an election and they basically voted, to protect reproductive rights in their state. So yeah, this is a terrible, terrible decision by the Supreme Court of the United States. The corrupt Supreme Court, I think we should be able to say now. So yeah, they gots to go. And we, as the community, the hysterical people, need to band together, form coalitions, get out there and organize and fight back. and obviously vote for the right candidates in November of 24 or leading up to that with your primaries in your various states. We got to get better people in Congress and in even your local elections, etc. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll engage with us in the Hysterical Society. We've got the Facebook group, we've got the blog where you can comment, and now we have the podcast. So we hope that you'll engage and really form these coalitions and band together. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. And keep fighting and stay hysterical, everybody.
We are the universe, so beautiful. Through all of the hurt, we'll stand invincible, so beautiful. We'll take on the world. 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 We'll take on the world.